Hello. Today, I'd like to talk about dancing. And I'm going to talk about two stories of dancing. One's kind of like an appetizer. Very strange story of dancing. Dancing mania, in fact. Actually, it's a dancing plague. That's kind of like the appetizer short story. And then for the main course, we're going to talk about dancing. The story of the planet of dancers. And that story is going to talk, about how we live. How we have lived. How we have lived even before this civilization. Even before people started harvesting plants from the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia 10,000 years ago. And how we're living now. That's the main story. So that's kind of the overview of this video. Now to the appetizer. In the Middle Ages, there were several outbreaks of dancing mania. Some called it a dancing plague. Other people called it a curse. Demonic possession. This happened many times over several hundred years. But I'll tell you one of the instances that there is pretty good documentation of. It happened in the 1500s in Strasbourg, which is in France now. In one summer, in July, a lady just started dancing. And kept dancing. There was no music, but she was dancing and flailing her arms and moving her whole body, and she couldn't stop. She kept dancing and dancing, and some of the other villagers in Strasbourg watched this. Well, that's strange. She can't stop dancing. They would try to help her, but no. She kept dancing. And the next day, she's still dancing. Well, that's sure strange. But what's stranger is that some of the people that were watching her felt compelled to dance too. Now there's a small group of people in this village who are dancing, and they can't stop. They keep dancing. Now there's a crowd of people looking at these groups of dancers, or group of dancers. And they're perplexed. Why are they dancing? They've been dancing for a couple days now. There's not even any music. What are they dancing to? And some of them are making obscene gestures. Some of them are naked. What is going on? But even in their incredulity, that's a hard word to say. I'm not even sure I said it right. Some of them join the dancers. And they start dancing too, unable to stop. Oh. I'm back. My wife came home. I forgot she was coming back home this early. So I've piled up a fort of pillows so that she can have some privacy and move around the place while I make this video. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about Ah, yes, okay. So now there's many people dancing. And it's been weeks now. In fact, now it's August. It started in July. And the original lady, she's still going. In fact, she's joined now by 400 other people who are dancing, and they can't stop. And there's descriptions of what they look like. Their eyes were vacant and expressionless. Some danced till they cracked ribs and died. Some died from stroke and heart attack. Others collapsed from exhaustion, but not before blood pooled in their feet and then burst out of blisters and soaked their shoes red. And a curious thing about these dancers is they were afraid of the color red. This became a huge problem. At one point, up to 15 people were dying in a day. So the government of the town at first hired musicians and ordered guild halls to be converted to dancing chambers. But this backfired, and other people started dancing too when they heard the music and saw the dancers. And so then the government had to go back and ban music. And they had doctors and religious people try to cure the dancers. So what they ended up doing was making these dancers wear red shoes because they didn't like the color red. They had to wear red shoes that were painted with crosses on the top and on the soles. And then they were corralled to go to this church, to Saint Vitus or Vitus, and eventually they did in September. So this started in July, and then the dancing mania ended, but not after many people had died. People don't really know what caused it. It is a very curious case in history, and it's a true story too. And it wasn't an isolated event. This happened many times over several hundred years in the Middle Ages. So that's a really strange story of dancing. Normally, you think of dancing as something happy and joyful and fun and brings laughter and entertainment. But not these people. They were dancing to death. Well, some of them were reported to collapse in ecstasy. So maybe it was good for some of them. But a lot of them died or got horribly injured. Actually, some of them were crying out for help. They were crying out to people to help them to stop dancing because they couldn't stop on their own. Very, 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 very strange story. Well, that brings us to the main story of this video, of today. And this story is actually my favorite story. I'm going to retell my favorite story that I've ever heard. In fact, I've already told a version of it in a video called The Takers, or Scary Bedtime Stories with Gooby. This was around Halloween, and I made a story about the Takers. And I even drew on a dry erase board some art to illustrate the story. So might want to check that out. But I'm essentially going to tell a version of that story here. Now, the story of the Takers is a concept that comes from Daniel Quinn. He's an author that has passed away, but he wrote some very interesting books. And in one of his books called My Ishmael, um, there's a telepathic gorilla that tells stories about our culture, the culture we live in, to the protagonist, which is a little girl in that, a teenage girl in that story. But one of the stories the telepathic gorilla tells the teenage girl is the story of the dancers. It's an allegory. An allegory just meaning that it's kind of like a metaphor, almost like a fairy tale that sheds light or gives insight into our condition of being alive in the way we live right now. So that's the story of the dancers. Now I'm gonna retell that story, which is my favorite story, and then I'm gonna add to it at the end because Daniel Quinn stops that story. I think he wrote it I can't remember when he wrote it. I think he wrote it in the 90s. But he ends that story, I think, like in the 90s. But now we're in 2025, and that story continues. So I'm going to add on to Daniel Quinn's story at the end and talk about my thoughts about that story. So here's how it goes. There was a planet. I should say there is a planet. And on that planet live the dancers. The dancers, for their whole existence, they've been surviving by living on the land of this planet, and for a couple hours a day, they dance. And they like to dance. They find joy and pleasure in dancing. And when they dance, something magical happens. When they dance, they create food. And that's how they survive. So, all the dancers on the planet, they dance for a couple hours a day, and they create food that they eat to survive. Well, that's how it's been for a very, 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 very long time. In fact, that's how it's been since the beginning of when dancers existed. But over time, some dancers, they realize, oh, you know what? If I dance for a couple more hours than 2, if I dance for 4 or 5 hours, I can make some of the foods that I really like, my favorite foods. So I'm willing to dance 4 or 5 hours every day so I can have more of my favorite foods. Because, it's okay to dance a couple hours, but if I only dance a couple hours, then I can only have a little bit of my favorite foods, and I gotta eat some other foods that I don't really care for that much. Well, time passes, and some dancers that live in that group that dance 4 or 5 hours, they realize, this is pretty good. I dance 4 to 5 hours a day, and get to eat my favorite foods. If I dance a little bit more, if I dance like 7 or 8 hours every day, then I'll have a little extra food on top of the food that I need to survive. And that'll be good, because then if there's a drought or maybe some kind of disaster that happens, I'll have a little extra food, and that's going to help me and my family get through the tough times, and we can still eat our favorite foods. So a group of those dancers start dancing 8 hours a day and making a little bit more food than what they actually need to survive. Now, the extra food starts piling up. And that group of dancers, they just pile up all the extra food into a stockpile, a storehouse. But some of the other dancers, they look at that storehouse and all the food piled up, and then they say, I'm really hungry. And that's extra food that those dancers don't need, so I'm just going to help myself to some. I'm really hungry. They don't need it. So now the dancers who made that extra food, they get mad. They say, no, this is my food. This is our food, not your food. We own this. Well, that's strange, because before, people were just dancing and they create their own food. You can imagine hunter-gatherers on this planet going out and getting berries off a bush, and then it'd be very strange to think, oh, somebody owns these huckleberries and blueberries and I'm eating. What? That doesn't make any sense. They're just there. They're there for everybody and everything, for other animals, for bears and birds. But now you have dancers saying, no, this extra food in this storehouse is my property, and you can't have it. It's only for me and my friends. And in fact, now we've got to designate someone as a guard. They're not going to dance anymore. They're just going to be a guard and prevent other dancers from eating our food. Well, okay, now you got someone whose job is just to stand there and with a weapon, like a rock or something, and prevent other dancers from eating that extra food. Well, as time goes on, that pile of food, the extra food, grows bigger, and so does the population, because they're making so much food that there's enough food for more people. Whereas in the way of living before, there's just enough food for the people that are alive, and population doesn't grow very much. But now, with all the extra food, the population's growing quite a bit. Now there's more mouths to feed. Well, and there's more wealth and power because there's more extra food. And now you have to have people who are managers to distribute the food according to, well, initially how the people want it to be distributed. And those managers, they don't dance anymore. They don't dance and make the food. Their job only is to manage where the extra food goes and to who it goes to. But now those managers have a lot of power. They have power over who lives and who dies, who has food and who starves. But they're not dancing. They don't create the food. They just have power over other dancers. Well, this continues, and the people, the dancers, they say, you know what? I've been dancing 8 hours every day my whole life, and I make more than enough food. I mean, not only just for me, but there's like a ton of food stored up in the storehouse. I don't think I want to work that hard anymore. I don't want to dance 8 hours a day anymore, because, why? We're just going to add more food to the storehouse, but it doesn't seem like we use it that often. I mean, sometimes we do, but those things that we were worried about, like famine and natural disasters, they just don't seem to happen very often, and I don't think I'm going to work that hard anymore. So some of them, actually a good amount of them, stop dancing 8 hours a day, and they start dancing 4 or 5. Some humans dance even less. And then the managers, well, they don't want to go back to dancing. They don't want to go back to having to make their own food. The guards don't either. I don't want to dance anymore, says the guard. I like being a guard. But if there's nothing to guard anymore, then I'm going to have to start dancing again. Well, the managers see this as a big problem because they become addicted to the power of choosing who starves and who is fed and who lives and who dies. They don't want to go back to dancing either. So this is a big problem amongst the managers. How do we get people to dance 8 hours a day or even more when they don't want to anymore? Well, one of the managers comes up with the idea, hey, if we lock up all the food, not just the extra food that's in the storehouse, but if we lock up all the food that's made, then the dancers, they have to come to us, and we can determine how much food to give them. Well, the other managers say, what? Why would anyone agree to having all the food locked away from them? They can just dance and have the food. That doesn't make any sense. And that manager says, well, hear me out. If we can convince the dancers to go along with this plan, or maybe we don't even have to convince them, maybe we just do it. Well, if we have all the food locked up, then the dancers can pay us money, we'll make money, and with money, they can buy the food back, the food that they made. And we can control how much food they get for how much money. And in that way, we can make sure that they get just enough to survive as long as they work as much as we want them to work. If we want them to work 8 hours, to dance 8 hours a day, well, then they can get maybe just enough or a little bit more than just enough food for them and their family. I see where you're going with this. This is not so crazy of an idea after all, say the other managers. Maybe we should give it a try. And so they do. They lock up all the food as soon as it is created. As soon as a dancer dances and the food is created, it's taken away and locked away. Now the storehouse has a ton of food. And the dancers have to pay money. So they dance, and now they get money, and then they have to give the money back in exchange for food. But the thing about the money is that the managers can decide how much food you get for a set amount of money. Like if you think of dollars like we have in America, it'd be like the managers being able to say, well, for $1 you can get a loaf of bread. And so people dance and dance and dance and dance to make that $1, and they get a loaf of bread and they survive. But then the managers want people to work harder. So then now all of a sudden, to get one loaf of bread, now you have to pay $3. And so you have to dance 3 times as much to get the same amount of bread. That's inflation. And that's a way to get dancers to dance as much as you want. Well, that's what happened on this planet, is that this group of dancers started living this way. It made the managers very, 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 very wealthy and powerful. And with all that wealth and power, they were able to make a lot of cool things. Well, cool is probably not the right word. They were able to make a lot of tools to destroy things. Weapons to kill other people, and tools to change the environment, to cut down trees and plant all the favorite foods that they want, and move other animals off of the land. In fact, to kill those other animals, especially insects and rodents and pests, they call them pests, that will eat the favorite foods. So, with all that wealth and power, well, they're able to change the land. And they do. And where this group of people, which they're called the takers, where the takers live, the forests are cut down, the waters get dirty and unsafe to drink. There are a lot of people, because there was a lot of food stored up. Now there's a lot of people, and they're crowded, and they're dancing 8-10 hours every day. Hi, girl. Well, the neighboring tribes, they still only dance 2 or 3 hours a day. They look at this and they say, this is a big problem. Those people are insane. Why would you want to work 8 hours to live crowded and dirty with water it's not really safe to drink? And the forests are cut down. All the animals and birds, they're killing them. They think that they're making themselves safe, but they're destroying the very earth, the very land that they live on. That is crazy. We'll never live like that. But in that tribe, the children look at the children of the takers and are jealous of all of the cool toys, all the cool playthings and ways to have fun that taker children have. And the children of this tribe dream of one day being a taker child too. So even though their parents refuse to live like that, their children want to. And when the children grow up, that tribe becomes takers too. Now there's a neighboring tribe that sees this, and they say, this is really not good. We got to make sure we teach our children the dangers of this way of life. And they do. And together with multiple generations, they stand up to the takers and say, we have no interest in living like you do. In fact, we think that that's insane. But the takers come now with a bunch of soldiers. Remember, they got a ton of people and fancy tools to kill and destroy. They show up and the takers say, this is the only way to live. This is the only right way to live. The way you live is primitive, and it doesn't use the land like it should be used. And so you got to become like us, or we're going to take it from you. And that tribe says, no way we're going to allow that. So they fight. But because the takers have nearly unlimited food now, nearly unlimited reinforcements of people, soldiers, and much fancier tools of destruction, of war, that tribe is quickly defeated. And they surrender, and the takers herd them to a very small portion of the land they used to live on. It's much too small to live the way that they were living, where they only danced a couple hours a day and had all the food that they needed. There's not enough land for them. So that tribe is forced to become takers too. Now, there's one last remaining tribe on this planet, and they saw what has happened to all the other dancers on the planet and all the other tribes. And they say, over our dead bodies would we ever become takers. And the takers come and kill them all. And over their dead bodies, the takers take their land. Now everyone on the planet of dancers are takers. And they all dance 8, 10 hours. Some even dance 12 hours, because if you dance 12 hours every day, you can get a little bit more food, a little bit more money to buy food than your neighbor. And so some people dance 12 hours a day so that they can feel good about themselves, that they have a little bit more than their neighbor. While others, well, they just barely scrape by dancing 6 hours a day. They don't have much, but they're okay with it. But everyone lives this way. No one dances 2 hours a day anymore because the food's locked away. As soon as they dance and create the food's gone. It's confiscated. So everyone has to live this way. And the taker children are taught that this is the only way to live, the only right way to live. And in fact, there never was a different way to live. Never. History began with the takers. Anything before that is called prehistoric, meaning primitive, meaning uncivilized, meaning there's no reason to ever want to live that way. In fact, living that way is going backwards. The taker way of life is the epitome of human potential, is what the taker children are taught. And they have no reason to question that. So they believe that. And they live that way, and they teach their children the same thing. That's the end of the allegory that Daniel Quinn tells. And that's a pretty frightening and illuminating story, in my opinion. In fact, it's my favorite story, the story of the dancers. Well, that's where Daniel Quinn ends that story. And I have the luxury of living, I think, 3 decades after he wrote that story. And so I've gotten to see what happens to, I've gotten to see some of what happens to the takers and the taker children. I am one of them. I am one of the taker children. And so I'm going to add to that story here. So now that the takers have taken over the whole world, there are maybe a very small handful of original dancers that only dance 2.5 hours a day, and they don't get their food taken away. But the only reason why is because they live in remote islands or jungles that the takers just haven't gotten around to conquering. It's too remote. It's too hard to get to. But the vast majority of people on this planet now are takers. And they're dancing a lot every day. And they get money to buy the food, and it's just enough food to keep them alive. So that is the ending of where Daniel Quinn stopped. And this is where my edition begins. So the takers have taken over pretty much all the usable land to cut down forests and plant their favorite foods, and they've conquered all the people that they can. And the managers, well, they're really wealthy and very powerful, but there's no new lands to conquer. There's no new people to enslave. But the managers, they are addicted to their power. Well, they're addicted to their growth of power. They want more. I want more, they say. So, there's only one way to get more when there's no more land to conquer and there's no more people to enslave that aren't already takers. You have to make the dancers dance more. So that they make more food. And then you have more food and more power and more wealth. The managers do, not the people. Okay, so now the managers meet and they say, okay, everybody's dancing on average about 8 hours a day. And we don't have any more people to enslave, and we don't have any more land to populate. So we just got to make the existing dancers dance more. Well, good thing we have money, and we can inflate the money so that now a loaf of bread costs $10, where it was $1 way back when, but most people don't remember that. We're just gonna jack up the price to $10 for one loaf of bread. Now people have to dance like 16 hours a day. It's the maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh. Now people are forced to dance 16 hours a day. And they're dancing and dancing and dancing. And their feet are bleeding into their shoes. Their ribs are cracking. Some are dying from heart attacks and strokes. It's really hard. They have to do it every day. And then they have to sleep and wake up and do it again. Well, the managers are getting a little bit more wealthy. Well, they were already really wealthy. Now they're a little bit more wealthy on top of already being very wealthy and powerful. But the people are saying, I'm tired, boss. I can't dance 16 hours every day. I've been doing this for years. My feet are broken. Well, some of the dancers, they get angry. And they say, why are the managers not dancing when I have to dance 16 hours a day? I don't think this system works. This system doesn't work for me, for sure. Maybe it works for the managers. And then some other people say, oh, you're right. This doesn't work. Well, what's in it for me? I'm literally breaking my feet, and my buddy died just from dancing. all to make the managers more wealthy. This doesn't work. Well, now you got a bunch of angry dancers, and the managers get together and they say, "Oh, we've had this before when people got angry when we jacked up the prices for a loaf of bread. Time to pull out the usual playbook." And so they look at the population of dancers, and they find some groups of people that are a small number of the population, and they say to all the dancers, "Hey, the source of your problems is that minority group right there, that small group of people. They're the reason why your bread costs $10 now. They're horrible people. In fact, they're criminals and they're evil. And they probably want to hurt your children. That's the reason why your life is so hard. Not because of us. We're the managers. We provide you the food. If you didn't have us, well, what good would your money be? Because you'd have money and you wouldn't have any food." Well, people have forgotten that they could make their own food by dancing. And the managers had made sure that people forgot that. So now all these angry dancers who were initially angry at the system, at the managers, they're like, "Oh, that minority group, curse them. They're the source of my problems. I wish we would just get rid of them. Make them go away somewhere. Or maybe even make them disappear. If they disappeared one way or another, my problems would be solved, and I wouldn't be dancing 16 hours a day for a loaf of bread costing $10. Well, they do end up making that minority disappear. And the managers, they already calculated this into the plan. If they lost some dancers, which were in the minority group, they still have the majority. And as long as the majority keeps having babies, well, they'll be okay. They'll have dancers. In fact, the managers really encourage people to have babies. In fact, having babies is being a good citizen. It's actually being a good person. The more babies you can have, the better. In fact, anyone who doesn't want to have a baby is ostracized and viewed as a weirdo and against society. So people say, I need to have babies because I need to be a good person. And the managers say, yes, you do. You need to have lots of babies. And so they do. They have lots of babies. And for a while, people say, gosh, life is really tough. I have to dance 16 hours. But, at least that minority group is gone. And, well, life seems to be still pretty tough, but at least that minority group is gone. Yeah, good riddance. And so for a while, people go along with it until they don't, and the managers have to pull out the playbook again. Well, that's kind of where we are now. So where does this end? Well, that's the end of my addition to Daniel Quinn's story. Now I'm just going to talk about my thoughts on the story itself and where we are. The original dancers, hunter-gatherers on this planet, the ones that are still alive, which there are only a very few tribes that are hunter-gatherers that are still in existence, they work about 2.5 hours a day for the food that they need. that's almost unimaginable to the rest of us. A usual workday is 8 hours, 5 days a week. Many people are working way more than that and still barely surviving. This taker way of life started in Mesopotamia on our planet about 10,000 years ago, whereas hunter-gatherers, so modern humans, have been alive for 300,000 years. For 290,000 of the 300,000 years, we had lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, like the original dancers. For the last 10,000 years, we've been living the taker way of life. And now, the taker way of life has expanded around the whole world. Just like the tribes that were either exterminated by genocide or moved to reservations, like the Native Americans, or assimilated, like the majority of tribes, everyone now lives the taker way of life, except for those few hunter-gatherer tribes that survive on islands or remote jungles. And there's no more land. In fact, the land that wherever takers go, the land is destroyed. The forests are cut down. It becomes desert. If you look at the original cities, like Uruk, U-R-U-K, where one of the old novels or writings, the story of Gilgamesh, comes from, the story talks about these vast cedar forests that were there. But if you look at pictures of that area now, it's desert. There are no trees there anymore. Wherever this way of life goes, it destroys and it kills. So, I think people get tempted by safety. Say, oh, if I plant foods and I live the agricultural way of life, or I live in this society, I'll be safe. But in reality, that way of life leads to death and destruction. And it has, since the beginning, 10,000 years ago. Just look at where the first cities started, this desert. And that's what's happening to the whole world right now. Now, unfortunately, a lot of us are stuck in the system where we feel like we have to dance and dance way more than we want to. Dancing can still be fun. Work can still be fun. But the way that we have to work and the amount and the tasks that we have to do, many feel like crushes their soul and their bodies. And we're told that we have to work even more and that the money that we have, well, is being inflated away so that the cost of a house or an apartment or food it just keeps going up. Rent keeps going up. And then we're told to suck it up and just keep going. And this is the way it has to be. Well, there's a lot of people that realize that, this system doesn't work. This doesn't work for me. What am I getting out of it? There's a guy who wrote a book. I forget his name. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it. Tainter was writing about what makes a complex civilization collapse to a simpler one. And essentially, what it is, I screenshotted something. Here we go. Complex societies fail when a significant enough proportion of the participants realize that the society is no longer benefiting them, may actively be harming them, and collectively cease to participate in the structures which hold that society together, including the laws, economic participation, social norms, etc. Well, I think a lot of people are realizing that those very things, that the way that we're living right now doesn't benefit them. In fact, it harms them. And I think that's why you see the phenomenon of quiet quitting You see, well, you don't really see protests anymore. All the protests seem to not do very much, and the people get brutally treated, imprisoned, charged with crimes. So you don't really see protests anymore. But there's quiet quitting. Quiet quitting means going to a job and just doing the bare minimum to keep the job and get paid so that you survive, but not giving that job any more of your soul and time than it requires. And that's more of an American term. There's on the Asian side, they have a term called lying flat and absorbing the beatings. I don't know too much about that because I don't live over there, but there is a reciprocal movement across the Pacific. But over here, it's called quiet quitting. There's also other ways that people are trying to deal with this. So, simpler living is one way to deal with this. When you realize that working that hard destroys the body and mind and soul, dancing that hard, well, I think people question what's really important to them. And what do they want in life? What brings them peace and happiness and joy? And I think the vast majority of people would agree that working 16 hours a day does not bring peace and happiness and joy. So one movement here that I've been trying to do, well, I did the quitting part. Actually, I didn't do quiet quitting. I loudly quit. I quit and I made a YouTube video about it. I guess that counts as loud quitting. But one thing I've been trying to do is simpler living. Really thinking about decreasing the things that I buy. I still buy a lot of stuff, but thinking about really hard about what I do buy. And food is a really good example. Going out to eat is very expensive. Buying processed foods from the grocery store, like a microwavable pizza, is actually very expensive. Processed foods in general are very expensive. Now, people will argue, well, fruits and vegetables and beans and grains, those are expensive too. Well, they're not nearly as expensive as processed foods and animal foods like eggs, milk, cheese, chicken, beef, pork, all that stuff. The ironic thing is that the cheaper foods, the vegetables, fruits, well, fruits can be expensive, but vegetables, whole grains, and beans, they're actually the healthiest, really, for our bodies. They help our microbiome. I've made tons of videos about that on the Help Your Body Heal series. They're actually the cheapest foods in the grocery store. The vegetables, the whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds. You don't need that much of them. They're kind of expensive. But not as expensive as getting like a fillet of salmon or something like that. So, ironically, the cheaper foods in the grocery store are actually the healthiest. And I think that in many ways that actually applies to other ways of living too, not just eating. I think working less is actually better for the body and mind and soul. And finding what gives you meaning. Creating stuff. You don't even have to create stuff for money. You can just create stuff for the act of creating it and enjoying. Being connected with people. Being connected with yourself. Sharing life with people that you love and you care about. And they care about you too. Those are way more important. So simple living. Yeah, buying less stuff. And when you do buy stuff, really think really hard about whether that's really something you want to do. That's something that I've been trying to practice. Well, I still buy, I think, too many things. But the less stuff I buy, the less dancing I have to do to make money. And that means more freedom to do other things. Look at clouds, play music. Well, I did have to dance to make enough money to get these musical instruments. Though once I have them, I can just keep playing music and having fun. I think that by simple living and just doing just enough to survive, I think it actually helps us out, helps people out, helps people regain their soul and health and peace and joy. It's definitely the opposite of what the managers want. The managers want us all to be working 16 hours a day and to have lots of babies so that there will be more people dancing. They want more babies because those babies will grow up to be people who dance 16 hours a day if they can convince and force people to do that. Well, they can't have my soul, no matter what. So I'm not going to dance as much as I used to. I'm still going to dance. Some. I want to live. But I'm definitely not going to dance the amount that I used to. And I'm happier for that. Well, that's my story on dancing. I hope you have a good day or evening. Bye.